Mirasee.
I'm Heather Pearce Campbell, and you're listening to Making It. I run two businesses called Pearce Law PLLC and the legal website Warrior. Both businesses are dedicated to supporting world-changing entrepreneurs. So growing up, I wanted to be a 6-foot-tall professional volleyball player. So from the time I was a young kid, like even grade school, middle school, I would go with my parents to our local YMCA and I would play with the adults. And then I got myself onto like city league teams as a kid. And so I was doing a lot of playing even outside of school opportunities. My dad was an entrepreneur. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and especially with us 6 kids and being married to my dad. So she did have the biggest job. That said, she was still very involved in doing books for my dad, handling everything, literally everything around home. And my dad was an entrepreneur who got involved in a lot of things. And he actually started as a veterinarian. And we were living in the middle of Idaho. And that failed. It was like charity work. He did both large and small animal work. And I was pretty little at the time. I lived there until I was about 8 years old. But it really became unsustainable. And that's when my parents made the transition to Walla Walla. We actually went bankrupt and lost our house and lost those businesses. And he actually got into a Wendy's franchise. And then from there, he went all kinds of directions. So I got to watch a lot of that. I think as a kid, I wasn't always entirely aware of, some of the deeper, harder conversations like around financial stuff. And so, it's not that it was just all freedom and fun, but I think it definitely fit my dad's personality. He had a pretty big sense of adventure. I think he had a very strong drive. He came from an extremely, extremely poor background. And so he was one of these kids that was just very, very determined to do it differently. I was a pretty well-rounded kid. And that first year at Utah State University, I did the music program. And while there was a lot that I liked about it, it was over-consuming. So anybody who's been through a music program, probably anywhere, knows that like a regular 5-hour class, you get 5 credit hours for that week. In music, that's a 3-credit class. And so you get kind of like double the class load plus all the practice time. And just means that you don't have a life, And I was a kid who loved the outdoors. I wanted to be heavily involved in the academics. I wanted to do a lot of things, but I really cared about being a well-rounded person. And so after that first year, I returned that scholarship. I ended up staying at the school. They had a great business program, and I switched to an academic scholarship, and I stayed and studied business. In that final year, I ended up taking a couple classes that, again, really changed the course of my life. I'd never once considered law school. So those classes were business law and then an advanced writing course where, for whatever reason, to this day, I don't even know how I chose the topic. I chose to write on legal ethics. And so what it meant is I had to go out into the community and interview attorneys and people that were very involved in the legal community and write a whole paper on legal ethics. And that is what launched me into the world of law. A super pivotal point in my life was actually that first year of law school, going off to the University of Washington, and just a short couple months later. So we started late. It was like a September start to school. And by November, my mom was not feeling well. And we could tell that something was off. She did not know what was going on. She couldn't verbalize it. She couldn't talk about it. I would call her and she would just hand the phone off to dad, which is super unusual. And so when Thanksgiving break came around, right? So I had to get through all of our exams, and I basically scheduled with all of the professors to try to take them early and get out of town so that I could be home by Tuesday, 2 days ahead of Thanksgiving. class normally got out on Wednesday, and then basically you'd be traveling home the morning of Thanksgiving. But I got home a couple days early and life changed. I walked in the door. My mom gave me this huge hug. And I think looking back at life, you have those moments like life before that hug, life after that hug. That was one of those moments. I just knew something was deeply wrong and life was not going to be the same. She'd actually gone in for physical that day, passed in flying colors, which I'm not sure how that happened. 2 days later, she ended up on Thanksgiving Day in the afternoon, right before our meal, having a grand mal seizure and ending up in the ER. And they found a tumor the size of a golf ball right in the center of her brain. So she ended up passing at the very start of my second year of law school. And during that time, I drove home to Walla Walla and I spent Thursday, Friday, Saturday with my family. And then Sunday, I would make the drive back to Seattle in time for school on Monday. And so I crammed a year of law school into the first 3 days of every week. I didn't open a book or study for exams or do anything during that family time. That single experience really changed my perspective on law school, on life generally, on what is stressful and what is not. At that point, law school was not stressful. Law school was a thing I did on the side of real life, which was super stressful. I don't know if I've ever felt I've made it. Like, that's the interesting part of, I think, being an entrepreneur and building and creating things. You're never really finished. I do remember the first time getting some consistent cases, clients, even taking on, because I worked on a couple of really large cases right out of law school. I got placed on a construction defect litigation project that I was personally in charge of over 200,000 pages of documentation that had to be handled for discovery. So it was massive. Like, I literally was in charge of a library of documents related to this project. And that was a long-term project. And I developed lots of connections and there was a whole team, and I had some of my own work going on the side. And so hitting that level of consistency, right? Definitely, like, I felt like, okay, I got this. I know how to do this. And I think the making it for me was realizing I've got the skills that if I need to turn around and do this again, I can do it. And so that was one of the early moments of feeling like I'd made it. And not too long later, like maybe 5-7 years later, because I continued to get myself onto some of the really big projects happening around Seattle, I would have partners of law firms coming to me, asking me, how are you getting all this contract work? How are you doing this? And so that was another time where I kind of felt like, oh, I've made it. I'm doing this very unique path. There are very few attorneys who were consistently getting contract work and managing their own practice and doing that well. And maybe in my mind, then it wasn't called making it. Now I can look back and see that those were pivotal moments. I love my clients. I show up to calls with my clients and I just feel like so elated that I get to spend time with these interesting humans and support their path and help them be a better, more strategic version of themselves. And so first and foremost is just reinforcing and building upon the joy that I get in actually doing the work. But second of all is, I think, the impact that has on the rest of your life. When you enjoy your work, which is a considerable chunk of your life, it elevates the way that you feel in the rest of your life. And for me, I have a very blended life. I'm a mom of two little people. I have built these businesses at the same time that I have been on the path to become a mother. And that was a really long, arduous journey for me. Had 7 years and 7 pregnancies and multiple near-death experiences. And there was a lot going on in the background. And so there were times where my businesses were just happening naps, evenings, and weekends, and still from the outside looked like a full-time going business or practice. But, really, there were some tough moments. But like traveling and getting to go meet clients that I've been connected with for years, and it has seeped into other areas of my life that just, again, bring so much more enjoyment. And often I will bring my family along, right? So that whole blending work and life, like to me, there's no way to unblend it. And if we enjoy our work, it really elevates everything else in our life. I'm Heather Pearce Campbell, and you've been listening to Making It. You can find me over at legalwebsitewarrior.com or Guts, Grit, and Great Business, which is my podcast.
Making It is part of the Mirasee FM podcast network, which also includes such shows as Course Lab and Once Upon a Business. This episode of Making It was produced by Danny Bermond and Jeff Govertson. Cynthia Lamb is supervising producer. Danny Eni, that's me, is executive producer. Post-production by Post Office Sound. To catch the great episodes that are coming up on Making It, please give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. And if you like the show, please leave us a starred review. It's the best way to help us get these ideas to more people. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.